Hey there guys, Nordic Warrior here, back with another prediction video. So, I'd appreciate if you guys would let me know how the audio is on this video, because I've been having some issues with my hardware, with my recording, and for whatever reason I can just never seem to get the audio right on these videos. I did a live stream last night, and yeah, those of you who were there for that live stream will know that the audio was just utterly atrocious, worse than usual. And yeah, I'm just trying to get my hardware sorted out, so let me know how this video sounds, and maybe in future when I do streams I'll use this microphone, and maybe I'll just use this for everything. We'll see. So yeah, let's talk about this fight. So a pretty bizarre rematch in the heavyweight division has recently been announced, and I'm sure a lot of you guys have heard already. Kubrat Pulev and Dereck Chisora are going to be having a rematch. Now these guys, of course, fought before back in 2016. Some of you guys, like long-time subscribers of mine, might remember the rant video that I posted the day before that fight. It's been taken down now. I took the video down years ago, but I made a pretty funny rant video the day before that fight, and I was basically letting my displeasure with Dereck Chisora be known. You know, I really didn't like Dereck Chisora back then, and I still don't like him at all, but you know, he's kind of grown on me a little bit over the entertaining fights he's been in over the years, but I digress. You know, that was just a video that I had on my channel that some of my old subscribers might remember. But anyway, the first fight, it's interesting because when you look at how the first fight went, and you look at the kind of fight it was, it's really bizarre to think that they're having a rematch, because first of all, there was absolutely no demand whatsoever for a rematch after that first fight. Not only was the fight not that entertaining, I mean, it was a pretty lackluster fight overall in terms of the actual action in the ring. But not only that, the fight wasn't even competitive. Kubrat Pulev pretty much dominated the first fight. It wasn't close, it wasn't competitive. It was basically one guy who was very crude, very workmanlike, very one-dimensional in Chisora, and then a guy in Pulev who was a much better boxer, much more well-schooled, much more experienced from his amateur days, and he really gave Chisora a boxing lesson. I think I had that fight, I've not watched it in a while, but I had it 10 rounds to 2 for Kubrat Pulev. Now, like I was saying before, so not only was it not competitive, but it wasn't that entertaining. It was a pretty boring fight in terms of just the styles of the two guys didn't really gel. There was lots of holding, lots of pushing. It was a very messy, ugly affair. You know, it wasn't one of the better Dereck Chisora fights. It was one of the fights where he looked really poor and got ultimately dominated and schooled. I know that some of you are going to say, wasn't it a split decision? But, you know, anybody who watched that fight knows that it wasn't close. I mean, the judge that gave the decision to Chisora, that was pure utter incompetence. I don't know what that was all about, because like I said, it wasn't a close fight. It was very one-sided, and it was a very clear win for Pulev. So going into the rematch, it's making me wonder what was it about Pulev in particular that made Chisora want the rematch, because there's a lot of guys out there in the heavyweight division, you know, sort of fringe contenders, you know, high domestic level guys that are winnable fights for Dereck Chisora, and guys that stylistically would gel and make a great fight. And I mean, we've seen recently pretty much the level that Chisora's on. You know, he's on a losing streak at the moment. I think he's lost his last 3 fights or something like that. He obviously lost to Usyk. There's no shame there. Usyk went on to become heavyweight champion. And he also lost to Joseph Parker twice. The first fight was very close, but I had him losing personally. I know a lot of you guys disagree, but that's how I saw it. And in the second fight, he got utterly dominated. He got dropped 3 times and pretty much schooled, and looked a shadow of his former self. So it's clear at the moment that Dereck Chisora is on the lower tier of heavyweight gatekeepers at the moment. You know, he's definitely not really anywhere close to getting a title shot or anything like that. He's just a guy who is looking for fun fights and really fighting for his fans at home. So I would have expected him to try and get a more winnable fight. I would have expected him to try and get in the ring with somebody like Adam Kaunatsky, who they were talking about him fighting, or maybe even Alan Babbage, another guy who they've talked about Chisora fighting, because those would be, first of all, they'd be very entertaining fights. Both of those guys are similar stylistically to Chisora, but at the same time, they're also very vulnerable. Okay, Adam Kownacki himself is coming off 2 defeats. Right, both of them were pretty brutal against Robert Helenius, who of course Chisora himself had a bit of a rivalry with back in the day, and that's a rematch I thought would have made more sense. And in fact, it was a rematch that was set a while back. They were going to fight again in Finland, I believe was it back in 2017 or something like that, but the fight got cancelled. You know, it's a fight that, or a rematch that was talked about for a while. But fighting Kubrat Pulev again, I don't really understand why Dereck Chisora is going down this route, because again, I don't really see it as being a fight that's going to be that entertaining. It's going to be in London again, and how much longer can this Dereck Chisora show continue? Because the guy keeps getting these big fights, these big opportunities in London, and he keeps losing. Surely if he keeps losing, eventually the market value there is going to go down, and he's no longer going to be packing in these stadiums, is he? So, I don't know, man, it seemed a little bit strange choosing Kubrat Pulev to be the opponent. Like, of all the guys, I find it a little bit bizarre. So how do I think the fight will go? Now, if you look at how both guys have looked recently, I talked about how Chisora's on a losing streak. He looked atrocious in his last fight against Joseph Parker, getting dropped multiple times and losing a wide decision. So he's definitely, well, he's been on the decline for a while. You know, he's definitely coming towards the end of his career. You know, I don't expect Dereck Chisora to be fighting more than the next couple of years. I think this will definitely be one of his final fights. As for Kubrat Pulev, he's in his 40s now, and he's had I'd say he's had a very lackluster career ever since his defeat to Vladimir Klitschko. He obviously got his title shot back against Vladimir Klitschko in 2014, and it was a bad defeat. You know, he not only lost that fight, but he got taken apart. He had a bit of success in the first round, hurting Klitschko with the jab, but after that it was all Klitschko. He just bounced him up and down off the canvas and brutally knocked him out in the 5th. And ever since that fight, there was always that air of vulnerability about Pulev, wasn't there? You know, he had the George Arias fight where he just didn't look very good. You know, he was clinching, he was a bit timid, looked as if his punch resistance was not really the same, and his confidence was a bit shaken. Then, of course, he had the Chisora fight, and he kind of came out his shell a little bit more with that fight. He won that fight comfortably, pretty much dominated it. And then after that fight, both guys' careers went completely differently. Pulev kind of went into obscurity a little bit. You know, he was very inactive. He had some pretty lackluster performances. Like, for example, he had that win against Kevin Johnson where he looked pretty poor. He also had that win over Samuel Peter, who was a shadow of his former self. Then he had about a year and a half out of the ring, and it looked as if his career might have been over. But he came back, had that title eliminator with Hughie Fury, and won that fight by a wide margin. And didn't look great, but then again, it was Hughie Fury, who was quite negative himself, and you know wasn't really that good. So it was a pretty one-sided win for Pulev. And yeah, he looked pretty good in that fight, actually. Then afterwards, he had that performance against Bogdan Dinu, where he looked atrocious. Once again, he got cut, got hurt badly, and had to really resort to roughhouse tactics, and had to really grit his teeth and grind out a win there. And if truth be told, Bogdan Dinu showed a distinct lack of heart and a distinct lack of stamina in that fight, which definitely helped Pulev out. Like, if Bogdan Dinu, you felt watching that fight, if Bogdan Dinu had been the type of fighter who was willing to go all out to try and get the win, like if he had a bit more fighting spirit, a bit more heart, he could have won that fight. Like, he could have stopped Pulev, but again, it wasn't meant to be, and Pulev got the win. Then he had that fight, I believe, was it Rydell Booker, that American journeyman that he fought, where he looked utterly atrocious in that fight. It was one of his worst career performances. Then he got the fight with Anthony Joshua, and we know how that turned out. It was similar to the Klitschko fight in the sense that he just took a beating, and he got bounced up and down off the canvas. And even though, once again, he had his moments here and there, was able to get his jab off and was able to spoil a bit, but he still got taken out, and he got knocked out brutally in the 9th, I think it was. So, yeah, that's pretty much been his career. I mean, he has had a couple of fights since, a couple of, like, inconsequential fights. He had that first round knockout win against Frank Mir, the former MMA champion, in one of them crossover fights where, you know, it was one of them, was it one of them Triller fights? I don't know what was going on there. There was some sort of mixed martial arts versus boxing crossover, and yeah, Frank Mir was completely shot to pieces, didn't have the boxing experience, and Pulev took him out in the first round and stopped him on his feet. Then, of course, he had that fight against Jerry Forrest, who's sort of a tough, durable journeyman who's given some guys tough fights. You know, he had the draw against Michael Hunter where a lot of people thought he won. So I guess beating Jerry Forrest in the fashion that Pulev did, maybe it shows that Pulev, obviously not at his prime, but at least he has something left. At least he can still go like a hard 10 rounds, and he's still got a good jab, and he's still dangerous. So looking at Pulev's career and how it's gone since the first Chisora fight, and looking at Chisora's career, and looking at the wars that Chisora's been in, like the 2 wars with Dillian White, the fight against Usyk, obviously the Joseph Parker fights, which were both wars, the Carlos Takam fight where he took an absolute beating before coming out of nowhere to spring that knockout victory. It seems to me like, out of the 2 guys, even though Pulev's a little bit older than Chisora, I think the guy who's taken more punishment over the years, and the guy who is more shot-worn at this point, is definitely Chisora. Because even though Pulev is old, you know, he's in his early 40s, I believe now. Even though he's older, and even though he's had more layoffs, maybe more injuries out of the ring and stuff like that, what he hasn't had is he hasn't had the sustained punishment over the years that Chisora's had. You know, even before he fought Klitschko, his route to a title was a bit easier than Chisora's. You know, Chisora had to... He was really thrown in at the deep end at domestic level, you know, fighting much more experienced guys, you know, the likes of Sam Sexton and guys like that, then fighting Tyson Fury and having a tough defeat there. Then, of course, fighting Robert Helenius for the European title, having a defeat there. You know, Chisora had a much harder run to get a title shot, and he was fortunate to get the title shot against Klitschko, where, again, he took a much more sustained beating than anything that Pulev has taken in his career. You know, he obviously had the Tyson Fury rematch, he took a beating there, and you know, Chisora all through his career, he's been the type of fighter who wears his heart on his sleeve. He sort of blocks punches with his face at times, you know, a guy relies on his chin, and over the years that catches up with you, and I don't think he's the same fighter. I don't think he's got the same stamina, the same punch resistance that he once had. And going into this rematch, I favour Kubrat Pulev, just like I favoured, just like what happened in the first fight. I think what will happen is Pulev will outbox Chisora. He'll use his jab, he'll outbox him at range, he'll maybe spoil a bit up close. Chisora himself will try and spoil, you know, he's a very, very dirty fighter, Chisora. Uses his head, hits you round the back of the head, hits you low, gets right up on your chest, and does all sorts of clumsy and awkward, crude things in the ring that make him very difficult to deal with. You know, he'll hit you low inside on the blind side of the referee. He does awkward things nowadays where he'll throw a right hand and then he'll switch to southpaw and throw a jab off the right hand. And he does things like that just confuses opponents, and he will make it awkward here and there. This will definitely be a messy fight, I think. But I think Pulev, to me, has the boxing IQ, and I think he has the experience from the amateurs, and of course the experience from the first fight, to where I think he knows what he has to do against Chisora. And I think Pulev's going to win the fight by a competitive but clear, unanimous decision. I don't think he'll stop Chisora, but I think he will win on points. I don't think Pulev hits as hard as somebody like Joseph Parker, for example, and he maybe doesn't even hit as hard as Usyk. So, I don't know, Pulev to me, he's never been the biggest puncher for a heavyweight. He's always been more of a solid all-round professional, and, you know, a guy who knows his way around the ring, and I think he'll win the fight on points. But I think it'll be a very ugly, messy fight. I wouldn't even be surprised if, like the first fight, there was some controversy with the scoring, because the first fight was in neutral territory, it was in Germany, and it was neutral officials, yet somehow one of them had Chisora winning the fight, despite the fact that Pulev dominated at least 10 rounds. That was weird to me. So with this fight happening in London, which is where Chisora is obviously a house favourite at the moment, it wouldn't surprise me if there was some skullduggery on the scorecards, or maybe the referee was on Chisora's side, but assuming this is a fair fight that's fairly officiated, and assuming Pulev doesn't just get old overnight, I think he wins the fight comfortably on points. So that's how I see the fight. I'm going with Pulev by unanimous decision. Let me know what you guys think. Thanks for watching, and God bless.